Okay, moving on to a new chapter. We are, and most of this section is dealing with ratios and rates, which is going to introduce chapter 5. But we're going to start out with some refresher courses, which means some things you learned in 6th grade, starting with proportions. So a proportion is an equation that states that two ratios are similar. And of course, tomorrow we'll dive into what ratios mean, specifically what it means by similar. So you learned this last year where you spent time learning how to solve for missing variables in a proportion. Now, a proportion is not the same thing as multiplying fractions because of the equal sign. So we use the method called cross multiplication. Some people refer to it as butterfly method, but you use the cross multiplication property to set up the equation, which today they will be set up for you. But then we are going to, once you cross multiply, which means you multiply your diagonals, then you're going to divide to find the missing term. So for instance, number 1, again, the reason why they call it cross multiplication is because, or butterfly method, is whenever you connect your diagonals, you do 24 times x, which is 24x, and then you have 8 times 15. So the 8 times 15 will have to go to the side and multiply. So 8 times 5 is 40, 8 times 1 is 8, plus 4 is 12, so it's 120. And then we're going to divide. So think about what we did in chapter 2, which was solving equations. Since I see multiplication, the opposite is division. So I'm going to divide by 24. So 120 divided by 24 is figuring out how many times 24 goes into 120. Well, 24 does not go into 1, and it does not go into 12. So I have to kind of guesstimate how many times 24 would go into 120. And if we think about 24 times 5, let's say that 20, 10, 11, 12, that's exactly 20, so x equals 5. Okay, some things that I can show you some shortcuts. So we'll do a couple of them where we can just do cross multiply. So for instance, here I'm going to multiply 40 times 5, so that would be off to the side, that would be 200. And then 4 times y, which is just 4y. And of course, the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide by 4. And 200 divided by 4 would be 50. And so y equals 50. Okay, so let me show you some shortcuts. It applies to most, not necessarily every single one. But another way to think about it is I have to, in this particular case, is how or what I multiply by 2 to get me to 14. So 2 times 7 is 14. So I do the same thing for the numerator. 6 times 7 is 42. So n equals 42. So almost like a shortcut if you know your multiplication facts. Well, let me go do another one to show you that. Nothing wrong with multiplication if you're comfortable with multiplying, or cross multiplication if you're comfortable with multiplying and dividing. But some shortcuts you could apply is 4 times what would give me 32? Well, that would be 4 times 8. So then I do the same thing in the denominators. 10 times 8 would be 80. So k would be 80. Let me go back to the first two that we did. If I look here, 40 or 4 times what would give me 40? Well, 4 times 10 would give me 40, and then 5 times 10 would give me 50. Here, 8 times what would give me 24? Would that be 8 times 3? So to go here, I don't do 15 times 3, I do 15 divided by 3, and 15 divided by 3 would be 5. So some cool little tricks there. So let's see if we can apply that to every single one. If I look at this one, 3 times what is 18? Well, that's 3 times 6. So then to figure out what m is, I have to do the opposite because it's going the opposite direction. So I'm going to have to divide by 6 to figure out what 126 divided by 6 is. So 6 times 2 is 12, and then bring down the 6. So then 6 times 1. So m equals 21. Now let me explain why that might be more beneficial. Because if you look at it, I don't want to mess with 126 times 3. Think about how large that number is going to be. And then you're going to have to divide by 18. So this method may be best as far as depending on what numbers we're given. So let's try to see if that applies every single time though. So for instance, number 6, I can't figure out what 15 times what is 10. So let's see if we can simplify this fraction. Well, what goes into 15 and 21? 3 goes into both. So 3 goes into 15 5 times, and 3 goes into 21 7 times. And so then it's a simpler number where I can do 5 times 2 is 10. So to figure out E, I do 7 times 2, which is 14. So E equals 14. Pretty neat, right? Let's see if that applies here. So if I can't come up with a number that can be multiplied by 6, then that means I'm going to have to, simplify if I can. So 9 and 6, 3 goes into 9 3 times, 3 goes into 6 2 times, and so 2 times 5 is 10. So to figure out C, I'm going to do 3 times 5, which is 15. Here, 6 cannot go into 21, so if I try to simplify, 2 goes into both, so 2 goes into 6 3 times, 2 goes into 4 2 times, and now I can do 3 times 7, which is 21, and then do the same thing in the denominator. So 2 times 7 is 14. So R equals 14. If I look at the next one, so where this may get a little dicey is when I'm dealing with decimals. So this is where cross multiplication is almost forcing me to do that. So if I look at number 9, because of the decimals, I'm going to have to cross multiply. Not necessarily have to, but again, it's a little trickier with decimals. So I'm going to multiply my 20 times 6.5. And you'll get just a couple of questions that will have some decimals, worst case scenario. Add those up, 0, 12. So one decimal place would be 130, and then 5.2 times V. So I'm going to divide by 5.2, which would be I'm going to divide, so ice cream here. Move the decimal place over. So 52 does not go into 113. So I have to figure out how many times 52 goes into 130, which would be, let's try 3. Too large, so it'd be 2, which would be 104. Then I subtract that, and it would be 260. 52 goes into 260, let's say 7 times. Too large, so try the smaller. Oh, there it is, 5 times. So if I figure out where my decimal goes, it goes after the 5, so V equals 25. Okay, if I try. So like we talked about, it's really just hard to determine whether or not you can do shortcuts like this, but when it comes to decimals, it's just a little bit messier. Whereas where you just have to almost just work out cross multiplication. So over here, 18.5 times 2.8. You multiply it out. 8 times 5 is 40, 64, 68, 8, 14, another 0 when you multiply a decimal place over, 10, 17, 2, 3, and then add. And then 2 decimal places total, so it's 51.8, and then you have a 14 in on the other side, because 14 times in. Then I'm going to divide by 14, which means I'm going to do the ice cream cone. 14 doesn't go into 5, but 14 goes into 51, let's say 3 times, which is 42. And then 14 goes into 90 or 9.8, let's say. Seven times, which is 9.8. And so the answer would be 3.7 there. Same thing on number 11, decimals involved. You almost just have to force yourself to multiply across. So 6 times 5 is 30. 15, 5, 2. 2 decimal places, so it's 4. And then 4 divided by 10. Is 0.4. And then over here, 4.67 times 2.5. 2 times 7 is 14. And then 3 decimal places is 11.67 or 675. And then divide by 7. 7 times 6 is 42.